part of our colloquium series, but also it's a sort of a special talk, and it's my great honor, and I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Deborah Fitzgerald, Professor of History of Technology at the Program in Science, Technology and Society, STS, at MIT, which is located in the School of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences of MIT, and where she is the dean for many years. She just told me that it's 9th year as dean there. And from the homepage, I found that on the Dean Fitzgerald leadership, the school's mission is focused in 3 areas. The first, research and innovation, to meet the world's greatest challenges. And second, teaching critical skills, a foundation for success in all endeavors. And thirdly, international education, educating leaders and global citizens. And so it seems like she has molded the direction of the school under her leadership. And personal research areas, Dean Fitzgerald research areas centers on the history of agriculture and food in modern America. She is the author of 2 books, The Business of Breeding, Hybrid Corn in Illinois, which is published in Cornell University Press in 1990, and the second book, Every Farm a Factory, The Industrial Ideal in American Agriculture, which was published in Yale University Press in 2003. And she's now working on another book which examines the role of World War II in reshaping the food industry and the nature of global food chains. And she has been very active in societies, professional societies, as well as at MIT. And in societies, she is involved in the governance of the Society for History of Technology, SHOT, the Agricultural History Society, where she's the president, and the History of Science Society, and Environmental History Society. And at MIT, she has served, not surprisingly, on numerous committees, including co-chairing the Gender Equality Committee. And so I believe that she will be able to give a talk from the perspective of a scholar in history of technology, but also from the perspective of administrator at MIT. And so please welcome our listening.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. It's a real honor and privilege to be here, and I want to thank Chion particularly for inviting me and arranging the visit. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I am going to actually read my talk, which I object to in others, but I'm going to do it because it's a talk that was prepared to give to the Academy of Sciences tomorrow. And they had to translate it, and so I have to read it. So I thought I might as well read it, but feel free to interrupt me at any point. There will be time afterwards for questions if you'd like. And if you'd like to talk about anything else that came up in the introduction, please feel free to bring that up too. So I'm really just so happy to be here. This talk is the theme of the conference I was asked to speak at is called The Convergence of Science and Humanities. I didn't know what it meant. I'm still not sure that I know what it means, but I wrote a paper on what it might mean or might not mean and why I think it's maybe a problem. So it could be provocative, it could be boring. I really don't know. So I appreciate that you're here at this early hour to hear a talk. Thank you very much for coming. And without further ado, we'll begin to read this paper. All right. Well, I'll skip the part about the Academy. The theme of the conference, the convergence of science and technology with humanities, is a very provocative and rich topic because it inspires us to think beyond our ordinary intellectual paradigms. The speakers who are with us here today, meaning tomorrow, represent the scientific specialties of neuroscience, physics, and computer science. And they are going to give papers that sound like neuroscience plus an observation about how humans do neuroscience. Computer science and an observation about computers and humans. But basically, I expect them to be science papers. That's how it looks to me. So anyway, each of these people has offered insights into how their field might enable creative and serious scholars to push beyond to the strictly technical aspects of their subject. For some scientists, this may seem like a worrisome trend, and while for others it is a welcome invitation into an emerging genre of new scholarship. I applaud the organizers of this conference for their willingness to explore new terrain. And I think that since I've written this, I've come to understand that there is something at stake in this conference for the organizers, and that this convergence notion has become kind of a thing that people are worrying about. But I didn't know that exactly when I wrote this. My own field is history rather than science or engineering, and for the past 30 years I've done archival research and written books and articles on a topic that might sound exactly like the convergence of science with humanities. My research is in the history of science and technology and has centered on agricultural science and technology in America. The organizers may have thought that I was converging these two areas on a regular basis. And indeed, I could give a talk that includes both history and science in America. But as I began to think about possible topics, I was continually derailed by the question, what does it really mean to converge science and humanities? And I realized that this was a fundamental question for all of us because it goes to the heart of our educational system. And it has implications for the kinds of students we will educate for leadership roles in the future. So with the Academy's forbearance and your forbearance, I will spend my time exploring the puzzle, what does it mean to converge science and humanities? Why do we want to do this? And what would it take to succeed? Here I'll sketch out the beginnings of an answer in 3 parts. First, I will discuss what the humanities are and why we might need them in other fields. Second, I will explore how we come to learn humanities, drawing on some international examples. And third, I will propose what a truly convergent science and humanities might look like. I hope this talk, offered in the spirit of cross-cultural friendship and collegiality, will spark discussion and debate about science and humanities education around the world. Which means I'm worried that I may step on a few toes in this, and I hope not. So people will understand I'm trying to start a conversation. Okay, so the first place to begin this discussion is to define what we mean by humanities. Indeed, most Americans have only the foggiest idea of what the term means, even those who study literature or history in college. Most seem to think that it is everything that is not science and technology. And that would include such things as business, management, architecture, economics, psychology, political science, the arts, to name a few. But most practitioners in these fields would vehemently disagree that they are part of the humanities. And if we look at the way in which American colleges are organized, we can see why. Virtually every college and university in America has a school or division of humanities, just as they have a school of science. Outside of America, however, such an entity is still an exception. And then it usually occurs in newer institutions designed expressly along American patterns. Most such colleges also have a school of science, a school of business, a school of social science, and a school of the arts, not to mention medicine and law and whatnot. And so forth. And institutionally, I think we can say that we draw the boundaries between humanities and other fields rather sharply. As it turns out, the notion of humanities was a construct developed at the elite American research universities around 1930, and in clear opposition to what many considered an overemphasis on rationality and modernity itself. an inappropriate prioritizing of science, technology, and business over an earlier emphasis upon theology, philosophy, and history. The humanities were conceived of as offering knowledge not about plants or atoms or protozoa, but about humans and what it has meant to be human throughout history. They also were seen as providing a grounding in historical time, a rigorous and analytical manner of understanding human phenomenon, and an introduction to the higher order aspects of life, justice, freedom, humility, and so forth. Typically, those disciplines that were then captured under the name humanities included history, literature, philosophy, languages, religion, and some parts of the arts. Sometimes other subjects were included, but these were the core fields. But what unites these fields in a distinctive way? What makes them similar to each other but different from science and engineering? Historian Jeffrey Harpin has developed a particularly good description, which I am going to quote here. The humanities, he writes, inculcate a sense of other minds and cultures, require and reward attention to formal and textual features as well as literal and manifest meaning, invite individual interpretation and inference, cultivate the faculty of judgment, awaken a sense of values, engage the emotions as well as the intellect, enlarge our creative capacities, challenge, deepen, and enrich our understanding of the world, provide fertile ground for the growth of self-knowledge, and under the right circumstances, open the way to tolerance, restraint, humility, and perhaps even to wisdom. Unquote. Let's dig into this a little bit. Inculcating a sense of other minds and cultures. This is the study of history and culture in other countries than one's own, often using languages not our own. Anthropologists do this by going deeply into another culture and learning to see through the eyes of their people. Famously, early anthropologists worked in truly primitive locations, studying hidden tribes. Today, the foreign culture might well be an Iranian mine in South Africa or an evangelical congregation in the Philippines. The method is listening and recording the lives of others with respect and a non-judgmental analysis. Require and reward attention to formal and textual features as well as to literal and manifest meaning. This is the work of literature, whose method begins with very close reading of novels, poems, plays, essays, and now films and other expressions of literary creativity. Learning to read closely is learning how to slow down and really give oneself over to the words to, again, fully understand what the writer intends. Third, invite individual interpretation and inference. This is the hallmark of humanities and social sciences and refers to the academic necessity of learning as much as one can about a subject so that one can safely reach a unique conclusion or original interpretation of the material. Another way to put this is that perhaps the key element of humanities education is critical thinking. According to William Graham Sumner, one of the first American social scientists and a hugely influential critic of traditional ways of thinking, critical thinking is, quoting, the examination and test of propositions of any kind which are offered for acceptance in order to find out whether they correspond to reality or not. The critical faculty is a product of education and training. It is a mental habit and power. It is a prime condition of human welfare that men and women should be trained in it. It is our only guarantee against delusion, deception, superstition, and misapprehension of ourselves and our earthly circumstances. Unquote. While the humanities value consensus and intellectual trends, it also values independence of thought and interpretation. This is probably the single most problematic feature of the proposed spread of humanities education around the world. Next, cultivate the faculty of judgment. This is a very difficult thing to teach and to learn, as we all know, because it comes largely from our experience beyond the classroom. We learn this over our lives in myriad ways, but in the academy, the best way to learn this is through philosophy, a discipline that teaches us how to think in a systematic way about very difficult moral, ethical, epistemological problems. Awaken a sense of values. This is something that we don't talk about much anymore, to our disadvantage. Our values lead us to help someone who's in trouble instead of walking away, or to defer one's personal interest to the interest of the greater whole. No single discipline teaches this anymore. Not so long ago, we learned this through our religious institutions. But as the number of people who learn this way declines, we need to find other ways to get this into students' lives. Engage the emotions as well as the intellect and enlarge our creative capacities. This is the place for the creative arts especially, whether through performing in an ensemble or writing a story or making a film or hearing a piece of music. This is an area of true convergence of science and humanities and arts. At MIT, the majority of our undergraduate students are involved at a very high level in music, and also to a lesser degree in theater. The math science brain and the music brain seem to be exquisitely intertwined to the great benefit of both. Challenge, deepen, and enrich our understanding of the world. It is hard to overstate the importance of this as we hear about the high number of humanitarian and political crises around the world. Challenging our understanding of the world is, again, something students need to do if they're to learn understanding and tolerance for other ways of living in the world. And finally, provide fertile ground for the growth of self-knowledge. Here we usually turn to psychology as we struggle throughout adolescence with questions about identity, our relations with others, our fears and ambitions. In most American colleges, psychology is always the most popular class because students want some help in figuring out things about themselves and others, the most core parts of their being. Okay, so that's the list that we got, and I'm going to now move on. Several things should become clear about what the humanities are and how they function. First of all, the humanities are primarily a set of methods and approaches to understanding ourselves and others. It's a way to fathom the shape of the world as it has affected our lives and is affected by them. And I say that very distinctly. Humanities are not topics. Humanities are approaches and methods. Although the different humanistic disciplines do not use the same set of methods exactly, in general they are all based on the development of critical thinking skills and deep immersion in the subject. Second, these methods and approaches are best developed through the study of particular subjects, literature, language, history, and so on. Some would argue that the whole point of humanities is to put human experience in a historic context. Others might say that the central idea is to open oneself up to the emotional and psychological dimensions of human experience as evidenced in novels, other cultures, wars, and so on. Thus, we can see that while one way of understanding something like World War II, to take an example, might be to memorize the names of generals and battle sites, the more fundamental goal will be to listen to the voices of those who participated in the war, as military and as civilians on all sides of the conflict from the beginning to the end of the conflict, in order to understand their experiences, to understand how and why people ended up in such a tragic situation, and possibly to gain insight into how to avoid such things in the future. This is the shape of humanities, the methods and methods. Doing humanities, as we say, is much harder than it looks. Second part. In the past few years, there's been a big debate among American scholars and leaders about the relative merits of the sciences on the one hand and the humanities on the other, in undergraduate education in particular. The debate has many elements, but it was reignited recently by two things. First, the Congress of the United States has been dominated in the last few years an impatient and angry right wing led by the Tea Party, which has attacked and decreased funding to humanities and social science research and education. It's a little unclear why they did this, actually, but people think it is because, first, the humanities are perceived by them, incorrectly, as fundamentally anti-religious. Not true. And second, because these fields encourage the questioning of received truths through critical thinking. I'll say more about that in the third part. In 2012, the Republican Party of Texas issued, this is Zach's home state, issued a platform statement that I quote, "We oppose the teaching of higher order thinking skills, HOTS, and critical thinking skills. We oppose this. because they focus on behavior modification and have the purpose of challenging the students' fixed beliefs and undermining parental authority. There it is. It did not pass. It targeted the discipline, the Congress targeted the discipline of political science, which not coincidentally includes scholars who write about the Congress, and eliminated nearly all the funding they received from the National Science Foundation. In addition, they targeted the National Endowment for the Humanities, slashing its funding nearly in half. The endowment has long funded not only individual scholars in humanities fields, but also libraries and archives that conserve historical documents. These two cuts were very deep and had very huge impacts. The second thing that happened was that Harvard University came out with a report showing that the number of undergraduates majoring in humanities was dropping precipitously. This was echoed in other college campuses, measuring the drop in students graduating with a degree in humanities. Some scholars did more research and found that the high number of humanities students was itself a bubble, kind of like the tulip bubble in the 17th century. It was itself a bubble that began around the time of the Vietnam War in America, a time of great social turmoil and experimentation, which again encouraged the questioning of received wisdom. A general feeling that America's problems were on a human rather than scientific scale led many students to turn to the humanities for answers. It seems that the number of humanities students is now settling back to where it was for most of the 20th century. So that's to say, I don't think there's a crisis in that, and I don't think majors are that way to figure this out either, but that's another subject. All this soul-searching about humanities and to a lesser extent social sciences also prompted the American Academy of Arts and Sciences to appoint a blue ribbon committee of business leaders, scientists, academics, politicians, you name it, some celebrities in fact, to study the link between leadership and education in the humanities and social sciences. Called The Heart of the Matter, the long and detailed report begins with this declaration, quoting it. This may ring familiar to you. Who will lead America into a bright future? Citizens who are educated in the broadest possible sense so that they can participate in their own governance and engage with the world. An adaptable and creative workforce. Experts in national security equipped with the cultural understanding, knowledge of social dynamics, and language proficiency to lead our foreign service and military through complex global conflicts. Elected officials and a broader public to exercise civil political discourse. Civil political discourse, founded on an appreciation of the ways our differences and commonalities have shaped our rich history. We must prepare the next generation to be these future leaders. So that was the principle of that report. Essentially, what the American Academy is saying is that America is in danger of losing potential leaders who have learned that the intellectual and social resilience of earlier generations. They worry that because we may lack the stamina to fight for an educational system that educates for leadership, we imperil our national interests and security. This is an extremely important point, I think. If we do not support the humanities and social sciences, we will be creating a class of young people who are great in laboratories, but helpless in the boardroom, the command center, the neighborhood, and the Congress. We need people who know how to think about humans. Coincidentally, this is essentially the message I've been hearing from colleagues in Indian and some Asian universities, not this one, who either never had or severely reduced the presence of humanities and social sciences in education several decades ago. Now they find, to their surprise, that they are having trouble identifying people who can serve the country in leadership positions. People who have a broad understanding of the world and who are used to dealing with the messy complexity that human beings create. MIT and other American universities are constantly approached by such universities to help them recapitalize their educational program to develop students who acquire this complex intellectual toolkit. Yet particularly because the digital revolution has transformed the academic and business sector over the past 10 years, the pressures for students and their parents to focus on the students' employment prospects has become ever more acute. Some of you may be familiar with this pressure. My impression is that this is most intense here in Asia, actually. But we are not immune to the trend in the United States by a long shot. In addition, there's a debate about the value of the liberal arts educational model, the model for virtually all higher education in the United States. Ironically, as many Americans become more interested in promoting early specialization in a quantitative field for students, in many other countries, the concentration on early specialization in science and engineering is giving way to a new interest in adopting the liberal arts model. In my opinion, the conference tomorrow will speak directly out of this moment of reflection and puzzlement when we try to figure out why the boundaries of our disciplines are drawn where they are, and whether there might be a benefit in pushing the boundaries out further. Typically, American college education includes two things, regardless of one's major field of study. A deep focus and expertise in one field, your major, as well as a broad study of many other fields, minors or concentrations or whatever you call it. Different universities have different ways of counting this. All the Ivy League universities feature this combination, and so do the liberal and small colleges. At Stanford and Harvard, students must take between 6 and 12 RAP classes. At MIT, known worldwide for its science and engineering education, all students without exception must take 8 classes in humanities, arts, and social sciences, which works out to be a quarter of the whole course load of all the undergraduates. So that's pretty high, right? I mean, for a school that you think of as being all about science and engineering. Many people are surprised by this. How can the world's premier science and technology university allow students to spend time in literature, history, music, and philosophy? The glib answer would be that our students have exceptional success following graduation, so it doesn't seem to have slowed them down any. But the better answer is more complex and reflects some deeply held American opinions about the purpose of higher education and liberal arts education. Not everyone agrees on every point, and given the state of our Congress over the past few years, you have perhaps some appreciation that on some issues, divide our society very, very deeply, and they're very entrenched divisions. Nonetheless, within education, these beliefs are supported rather strongly. These mean the ones I'm going to tell you now. And there may be some disagreement with this, but here's what I think. One, there is a fundamental belief in a student's self-determination, that students must follow their own passions and strengths. This grows right out of the original American belief in personal independence. Generally, Americans believe that each individual has the right but also the responsibility to follow their own beliefs and commitments. While this, of course, can lead to trouble in some people, overwhelmingly people believe that such a position is essential in a democratic society. Although many parents have a lot of control during the high school years, and who doesn't know that, students in college are not so constrained. 2, most parents and teachers have a high tolerance in America for allowing students to take a little time to decide on their ultimate adult destiny and professional career. At MIT, students do not choose an intellectual path until the end of their first year. So that's what? That's in 2013, the way we count it. Even then, they are allowed to change their mind a few times before settling on a final degree field. This flexibility often makes parents really nervous. Really nervous. But for educators, it is part of the natural process of adolescents learning what they are good at and what they aren't, what their strengths and weaknesses might be, what they are passionate about, what they care about. Even with this, virtually all MIT students finish their degrees in 4 years. So again, not such a problem. 3, although many parents are anxious about their children's choice of profession or career, what we call their major, most will support this student's decision, really, when it comes right down to it. Even though many choices would seem to be a one-way ticket to poverty. For example, although all students who start at MIT assume that they will become scientists or engineers, the actual experiences they have can lead a significant proportion of them to shift to humanities or business or architecture or many other things. Because they also have a very high rate of acceptance into graduate school and nearly full employment after graduation, parents are pretty tolerant of this because they tend to land okay. 4, So, which is to say, MIT could be a model for this kind of thing. I think it's not such an unusual pattern, in fact. 4, there's a belief that human intelligence and wisdom is strengthened by both breadth and depth of knowledge. In effect, this means that people believe that engineers need to understand how to deal with ambiguity and uncertainty, and that historians should understand statistics and basic quantification. It's very difficult for students in the United States to get through college without learning a whole bunch of stuff. One of the more surprising expressions of this philosophy appeared in a recent conference talk by Google's Director of Engineering, titled, "Why You Should Quit Your Technology Job and Get a Humanities PhD." Indeed, it turns out that Google hired 4,000 to 5,000 humanities graduates in 2011, finding that they were much better at certain kinds of technology jobs. According to Marissa Mayer, now CEO of Facebook, she writes, I'm quoting her, developing user interfaces, for example, was at least as much about how to observe and understand people as an operational skill. Unquote. Another Google leader told me that he prefers to hire humanities majors than engineers because Google's looking for creativity and a willingness to deal with ambiguity, qualities that humanities are all about. Really talented engineering students, he continued, are too eager to solve the problem, reluctant to let the mind wander a bit on the way to perhaps an entirely new way of dealing with the problem. I've heard that over and over again. And I've heard about MIT students before. In looking at these principles or assumptions, one is struck immediately by their singularity. Where else on earth do intelligent people believe these things? And the answer is almost nowhere. European and Asian educational traditions are much different, and please correct me if I'm off base on this. For one thing, my understanding, European and Asian educators have far less patience with students, often expecting quite young students to select a specialty and become expert at it forever after. For another thing, and perhaps more fundamentally, European and Asian educators are not always committed to the students' freedom to chart their own educational path, or not to the same extent. This is a really stark difference because that's a bedrock principle in American education and explains just about all of the peculiarities of American college education. Some traditions in Asia and Europe are based upon deference, for example, and modesty, as well as a commitment to act in the interest not of oneself but of the family or the company. Thus, what we might call the national educational styles are deeply embedded in long-held cultural and historic circumstances. This can make international exchange somewhat difficult. And I'm going to give you an example. There's an Asian university, which I will not identify, that identified the very best college students in humanities and social sciences to send to a group of universities, including my school, not engineering, mind you, but humanities and social science schools at MIT, Harvard, Berkeley, Chicago, University College London, to get a doctoral degree. Of the hundreds of students put forward over 3 years, less than 10 were accepted. Why? Were they not smart enough? No, they were very smart. They were really smart, and their national score showed that. Were they not highly recommended? No, the recommendations were excellent, as good as we see from anyone. It turned out that the thing that really hurt these students was their inability to identify a research problem that they wanted to focus on in graduate school. While American grad students were chosen for their identification of a good research question in humanities and social sciences, Asian students seem to be chosen for raw ability. If this is correct, then that students in different countries are evaluated on different things entirely, then cross-cultural exchanges in humanities and social sciences will remain tricky to accomplish. It seems pretty clear in the end that it would be highly desirable for people to think and work in more than one register, to make sure people have a toolkit that includes more than one tool. But for scholars like you and I, and here I'm talking to the others, academy people, convergence is nearly impossible. As mature scholars, we have each developed an intellectual style that is congruent with our disciplinary norms. I think like a historian, you think like a philosopher, somebody else thinks like an engineer. While we might add new topics to our research, it is really difficult to add new analytical approaches that are very deep. The only place true convergence might occur is in our high schools and colleges, in creating students' toolkits regardless of their major. It's not only possible, but it is crucial to future research and leadership. Alumni from MIT have spoken a great deal on this topic. The former Dean of Engineering and now President of Carnegie Mellon University wrote recently, it is likely that the next decades will introduce a cascade of powerful new technologies to our nation. Now is the time to continue and expand support for those humanistic disciplines that will allow us to understand the incentives and responses that will shape the ways in which human beings will use and abuse these new capacities in intended and unintended ways. Now, I kind of think that's part of the debate that's going on in Korea right now. I'm not sure. A recent graduate who is now a physician put it this way: MIT biology prepared me for medicine. MIT literature prepared me to be a doctor. And here's what Ray Stata, co-founder of Analog Devices, said: the most enduring value and benefit for my MIT education turned out to be the introduction to philosophy and history of ideas. Okay, I'm nearly done. Scientists and engineers have tackled the convergence issue in their own ways. One scientist I know uses the last 5 minutes of his lecture for a musical reflection on that big topic. For his lecture on fluid dynamics, for example, he plays Handel's water music. A chemical engineer teaches the already difficult thermodynamics class alongside Sadie Carnot's original treatise on the subject, but not in French. Even more ambitiously, some science majors go into history of science, effectively doubling the tools at their disposal. Professors with this background can speak as authoritatively about the science they're covering as they can about the history, and both genres are the better for it. While these individual efforts are laudable, our world problems are much too challenging to address only as individuals. And this is my point. Rather, the very structure of our universities must begin a transformation that will allow truly interdisciplinary work, which in turn will allow us to address the most entrenched and difficult problems with new ideas and approaches. The idea is not to turn scientists and engineers into humanists, or humanists into scientists and engineers. We need both of those different things, but rather to prioritize two different ways of going forward. The first is that we need to introduce students at a young age to a substantial combination of both science and humanities that will provide the intellectual exercise and pliability to feel at home in a much larger number of endeavors. In other words, you don't want to have a situation where somebody's very deeply trained in engineering, but when asked to adjudicate a dispute, says, I don't know how to do that. That's what the psychologists are for. Ask one of them. Or the humanities people do the same kind of thing. Here's where the liberal arts tradition really shines. Second, it is imperative that universities as well as governments insist on developing teams of experts that include heterogeneous skills: engineers, humanists, scientists, social scientists, and even artists, to attack problems that are rooted in social systems. Whether it is healthcare treatments, epidemic disease, poverty, food safety, climate change, whatever the grand challenge will be, and we hear a lot about the grand challenges and how to address them, it will benefit enormously from a multifaceted approach. This has never really been attempted, interestingly, in any substantial way as far as I know, except around the edges. And surely we have nothing to lose by trying. In closing, as my remarks have suggested, at this time in history, we need more than ever to figure out how to combine knowledge of the natural world with knowledge of the human world, and to ensure that our youth master this combined approach to the world. In the end, it is up to the educators and politicians to make this happen. We can no longer afford to look the other way and must prepare students for leadership in a challenging but forward-looking world.
All right, we have plenty of time for discussion, and just briefly, we also delighted to have Professor Dong-Nam Lee, who is Dean of our college, the College of Humanities, Social Sciences, and Convergent Science. And so, you have something to say. And then now it's open the floor. Thank you very much.
I just take the advantage to ask a question and break the ice breaking. Because our students usually shy to ask. But I don't know about STP students, probably afraid not to ask. First of all, as he just introduced me as the dean of the liberal arts and convergent science, and even though we use convergent science, as you actually tested in the beginning of the talk, we don't know what that means.
Oh,
but at least what you know, as you concluded, the convergence means not just the trying to solve, technology to solve these certain problems. This is kind of the way of thinking to collaborate with each other to solve a target problem. That's my own definition of the convergence. Anyway, because you are the professor of the MIT and even the liberal arts school in the very science and engineering focused university. So my background is computer science. I'm currently the professor at the computer science department. But like the first part, he's in the middle of the big forest, but he's sitting in the island. So we don't, as a matter of fact, STP and the Department of Social Science and Humanities and Social Science, they don't have the undergraduate program. So, but you have undergraduate program. The students coming to your department, they are the math genius, or they are coming from some of the non-math or the science background.
So all students, can you hear me? Can you hear me? So,
use this. Put in the talk. So that's just natural voice.
all right. So all students who come to MIT for an undergraduate degree are there to become scientists, engineers. That's it. No one comes there to major in literature or music or anything else. But because they have to take 8 classes during their time there, they have to figure out what they're going to take. And they take classes in all of our subjects. There are 10 departments in my school. I'll tell you what they are. I'll try to. Economics, political science, linguistics, philosophy, STS, science, technology, and society, literature, languages, media studies, music and theater arts, history, anthropology. And yeah, I think that's it. And so they take classes every semester, and so we see all the MIT students, whereas our colleagues in chemical engineering see chemical engineering majors. That's mostly what they do. So it's a very different experience. And we do end up with a couple of majors in every department. The most majors in our school are in economics. We have a very good economics department. So we end up with 30 or 40 of those students who ended up there. They didn't expect to.
Double majors, right?
And there's a lot of double majors, right? And then the other big concentration of majors, and again, it's 25 or 30, is in media studies. But those are students who all went through the first year of MIT's core curriculum in super difficult math and science. 2 calculus, 2 physics, chemistry, bio, very difficult stuff. So they all have that together, and then they can go off into their major. Some of them end up. Some of them discover they don't love science as much as they thought they did. I mean, they love it, but they don't love college science for whatever reason. A lot of them got there and they realized that they're not going to be the very best, and it really is a shock because they always were the best. And so that whole thing is very traumatic, and so sometimes they look at other things.
This is
Pretty similar, I bet.
Similar in
Yeah.
our school.
Yeah.
Economics is a double major.
Yeah.
And that's only the department in my college
Yeah.
has the undergraduate program. Same facility, same experience.
Yeah, right. But our students can major. They don't have to only double major. They can major.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Full stop major.
Thank you. Now your turn to ask the more questions.
Okay.
Yes.
So when is like an appropriate time for this liberal arts education? Because like in the US, arguably we have like this liberal arts section happens in undergraduate, whereas in countries like Italy, it happens in high school.
Yeah.
So when is the right time, you think, to actually have this dual-faceted education?
Well, I would argue that in the States, liberal arts is characterized all the way through from kindergarten on. I mean, students are always required to take literature, math, science, languages. It's the same all the way through, I would say. And liberal arts, by the way, includes mathematics. People forget. It's not oriented that way anymore, but that's the original parts of it. So it kind of characterizes the whole thing, I think. Did you? Those of you who went through,
I don't know.
Did you go through that?
Yeah. High school didn't have it as much, I think.
Yeah.
I have a question. What's the difference from STM, STEM, from STS program? STS program, Science, Technology, and Society program. And your MIT emphasized STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, Math. So I would like to know the difference between STS and STEM.
Yeah. Well, they're very different. So STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. I did the same thing. Medicine should be in there, shouldn't it? STEM is the core of what MIT is about, just like KITE, I believe.
Yeah.
And STS, science, technology, and society, is historians and anthropologists mostly. Several of whom have a dual strength in physics or in engineering. But most of us on the faculty in STS are social scientists and linguists. But we focus on science and technology topics. And so most of us are not trained in both equally, both science and humanities. We've chosen humanities and social science. So pretty different. But because we study science and technology, we're kind of interested in MIT. Because that's our job. Does that answer your question?
May I ask?
Sure.
No, my voice is loud enough. As long as you can hear me. I don't need to use my microphone. Anyway, so we're in the game. Head of dean. How many occasions or how frequently you the professors and also the students collaborate or finding out some collaboration effort with other science and engineering department faculty members?
Not too often.
Well, I know a few faculty members who closely working with MIT lab and CSED.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a couple, a few. I mean, I can count on one hand who they are.
Oh, I see. Or the you guys are not encouraged to work with the faculty members in science and engineering department?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's nice if we can figure it out, but it's personal.
Oh, I see.
It's not institutionally easy to do it. And so, as dean myself, I can encourage the faculty to tell I'm blue in the face, but if people don't want to collaborate, they don't want to collaborate. I mean,
That's true.
faculty, here's one of the big differences that I think is often forgotten. Scholars in history or in social sciences and humanities are single-purpose humans usually. We work alone on one thing. Scholars in math and science work in teams. They work collaboratively all the time. And so those two different ways of working are really kind of hard to bring together.
That's how I have experienced several months.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they don't...
Because I created a project and then let them work together and it's really difficult.
It's really hard.
Their
Their style is so different. And they don't... For social science and humanities, a lot of social science is more collaborative. Political science is pretty collaborative, economics is pretty collaborative. But they just divide things up in chunks, and you do that, and you do that, and you do that. But in history, it's real hard. It happens, but it's hard. And it's too bad. I mean, I do try to encourage it, but The number of projects that lend themselves to that everybody's excited about are kind of few. And they have to come up. They can't come from me or from you, right? It has to kind of bubble up out of people's actual interests.
David Kaiser is giving you a physics course as well as the history of science.
David Kaiser has a PhD in physics and in history of physics. 2 PhDs.
It's
Yeah.
up now.
It's really unusual.
I wanted to suggest 2 areas where I think there is. So one issue is collaboration and research. And I trust you to know that much more than I. But I do remember at MIT there were 2 areas where there was continuous interaction and maybe collaboration. Teaching.
Yeah.
And I remember that because curriculum is a university-wide discussion, science and engineers as teachers were actually very supportive of humanities and social sciences education. Like it was, my impression is it was never them saying, get this off the curriculum, correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, no, that's right. No, they believe it's important for the students to have all the
And so they were interested in the kinds of courses that the humanities and social sciences professors were designing.
No, the requirement of 8 classes is a faculty-led requirement. It's not the president saying you all have to take 8. It's the faculty, engineers, scientists, everybody, coming together and saying this is important, this is a distinguishing feature for our students. This is one of the things that will make them really good. So,
and the other, which does, I think, affect research very, very indirectly, is that the review committees for the departments, when they have their, I don't know if it's biannual or annual reviews, were made up of a mix of specialties, alumni, and so it's a moment where in each department, even you're not having historians review what the history department does, and so it's a moment where you have to be able to explain your research to people who have little disciplinary interest. Direct disciplinary interest. And so it was a moment where for humanities faculty at MIT, it could have been productive. Sometimes it's stressful and not productive, but it was a moment where they actually had to think, how can I make this relevant to scientists and engineers?
Right.
And I
It's
think
a moment of reflection.
It's different from other universities.
Yeah, that's right.
Like my alma mater before.
I think you talked to him at the publisher of the Humanities and Social Science. I always, especially the Department of Social Science.
But it worked both ways. It wasn't only a science and engineering.
But every year they review, they are
that's too much.
frustrated because to convince that their research and education is really fruitful, but in the eyes of the engineers and scientists.
But I think it works the other way too, where the science and engineering departments would have humanities.
Everybody.
Also saying, well, this is interesting.
That's a good point.
And it might come up in terms of.
It never happened in Kaiser. So.
And it comes up in terms of human subjects research. There would be a lot of interest in what the humanities professors, because bioethics is an area where our professors are often more.
Well, anthropology.
Yeah.
You're using a lot of human subjects because you're studying a community or something like that. The rule was made for people dissecting clocks and chips and things like that. But in fact, there's a social scientist really having a huge similar issue.
Yes.
Jim?
I'm Dr. Stephen Hayes at STP, and I'm interested in the science policy, but I learned that regarding the science policy, some strategic approach to science policy, such as research prioritization, has been extended globally, and so I wonder that kind of policy or some neoliberal reform movement have affected the humanities field. And
Can you say the last bit again? Well, just say what you said. I just didn't hear it.
I wonder some neoliberal policy movement, policy reform movement. For example, the Reagan administration policy. I wonder they kind of affected the the field, or whether and what was the debate in the humanities? And,
That sounds like a good dissertation. I don't know the answer to that, honestly.
because I want to ask that whether the School of Humanities and Social Sciences do some specialization about the field and how it happens. I wonder the influence of the government policy or the school administrators or the professors. I wonder how it is debated in the school.
That's a really good question. How do they? Well, I'm not too sure, honestly.
Don't have to answer.
It's a really good question. No, it's a good question. I'm a little bit stumped. I mean, I think that it's not always clear that these kinds of debates do affect policy. Except insofar as policy is largely, well, who is policymakers? Part of my problem here is who the heck are the policymakers when it comes right down to it. You know, in Washington, policymakers are politicians, and they tend to be lawyers, right? And so what tradition are they loyal to? The law. And that's their tradition. It's not necessarily, it's definitely not science, it's definitely not humanities per se, it's nothing that's in our mix right now. Then you have to ask, well, who do they talk to? Who do they get their information from? And that's the question I really can't answer. They talk to whoever they think the experts are.
I mean, okay. Or if there was some funding cut, funding cut for the research in the field of humanities,
Yeah.
then do the school, I think the school discuss about the specialization or the sustain their diverse fields, or do they?
Are you asking if government policies shape the fields? Is that really what you're saying? Is do government policies lead a discipline to shrink or to expand? Is that the kind of thing? Like how much effect?
Yeah, I learned that in the field of science, that kind of policy effective.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. So you look at something like recently, the last 5 years or so, there's been a huge push towards brain science, right? Because people are talking about Alzheimer's and childhood disease, childhood syndrome, stuff like that. So let's put a bunch of energy into brain science. And so yes, indeed, a lot of people went into brain science, and departments got bigger. They trained more graduate students. There was more federal funding. That's how it works. That's traditionally how it has worked in the States. Also, by the same token, right now, we're facing a big decrease in funding, and the federal government, which has been the biggest supporter of physics, is pulling back most of the money. And so suddenly physics, so my counterpart in the Dean of Science is in a panic because they're going to lose massive amounts of money because physics is drying up federal funding for it. So it's going to change the field for sure. And I don't know how it's going to change physics, but yeah, the federal government does, but not so much on these fields. On humanities and social sciences, I really don't think it has, except quantitative social science. Quantitative social science is heavily dependent on the government, and they can really be hurt by this cut. And humanities, nobody pays for humanities now. Not much funding for it. You get lucky.
The same is true here. Greg?
My question is kind of a conceptual one. Do you think it would help for us to understand a bit more deeply what convergence is and how it relates to things like disciplinarity?
It would be helpful to me to understand it.
Do you have any thoughts about those kinds of ideas, about how they relate to each other? There's been debates about interdisciplinarity in the past, and I worked on a interdisciplinary research project at Bristol. We were constantly confronted by problems of communication, different methodologies and practices. And we realised that we had to develop a common kind of vocabulary that we can talk to each other.
Right.
So, I mean, similar kind of problems arise in the context of liberal arts education and research. I'm wondering if we can learn something about how we've developed ideas related to discipline in the past and how that relates to the idea of convergence now. Because it's not just a conceptual issue, it's a methodological issue. So, how do we approach this? It seems like there's a deeper kind of issue for us to address here.
Yeah, I think that's I'm sure that's true. But that's not what people here mean by convergence, is it? Like when people in Korea say we need convergence, is that what they mean?
Well, I think there's
not exactly. They try to create some new area, but as you mentioned in the last part of the talk, it's not actually not the matter of creating new problems. Just I think it's a matter of how to encourage people to work together to solve the problem. Because previously people just only look at the problem in their own sector. But today's the problems we are facing, like poverty, all the disease and environment issues, it relates to many different aspects of the research and education.
Only one of which is technical.
That's true.
One of them but the human dimensions of that, the policy dimensions,
absolutely,
all that stuff, they tend to forget until the plan is ready. And they say, here, we can sell this.
So personally, my own research area is the internet. The internet used to be just the technology to transfer the data between computers. Now, computers is almost invisible. So it's in the hand of human beings. Now, once in the computer is in the hand of human beings, we have to think about human beings, right? Not the data itself. So then that's why I started talking to social scientists and city planner, just like smart things. Because it's placed in everywhere. The computer science cannot handle all the issues. It's only just, as she said, a technical issue, not a social issue, a political issue, and even the law.
I think, though, getting back to the question about federal support and so on, I think that it's very difficult for people in government who feel a lot of pressure to solve problems very quickly. I think it's very hard for them to slow down long enough to say, really, who do we need around the table? Maybe we need one of these, one of those, one of those, one of those. They're more inclined to say, let's just fix it, even if it doesn't work. And that's the most expeditious thing to do, but I think it's caused them under trouble, in fact, because it's very hard to go back and fix it in any meaningful, whatever the other can be. I agree with you that the communication piece is very important, and my guess is that among humanists and social scientists, there will be more disagreement about coming up with a convergence language. It'll be like a nightmare, honestly, because the literature people feel they own the language and they don't want you messing with it. Their words are meaningful. They mean special things, each one. And you can't make them all, you can't do that. So, and the philosophers, that's right. Very difficult. No, I mean, the disciplines are so much more reliant upon the articulation of ideas that any kind of diminishment of that will be a big fight. And perhaps the right thing, but it'll be tough.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your talk. I'm a master's student at STP. And I'm one of the students who changed my major, and I had majored in technical engineering, but I was an undergraduate student at KAIST. But at some point, I changed my major to STP program. So now I'm a social scientist, maybe.
Can I
university or social sciences. It's how I have learned in career society, so that's what I can learn. But my question is not conceptual, but individual maybe. I wondered. I also think that there are a lot of in MIT cases. The students are also changed their major and at some point came to the other words. But I think there can be some difficulty when they go out and they become some professional researchers and they have to begin compete with other people who have studied only social sciences. They did not change their major, but they have studied social science for a long time. But at some points, for a person like me who changed their major, they have not many experience in studying social science. But so there can be some difficulties. So I wonder what kind of strength and weakness there can be for students like me who changed their major from in science and engineering fields. So yeah, that's
a good question.
That's my story. No, explain it. Yeah.
What is this one?
Do I need it? That's a really good question, and I think it's on the mind of many students who think about doing this. They're a little nervous about making the transition because of that very thing. Their competition has been there longer and deeper and all that. You have to remember, though, that you bring something to the story that your competition doesn't have. You bring a style of thinking that you learned in engineering. 2 years ago, or whatever you were in engineering, you learned a lot of stuff that you don't maybe even realize. That has to do with the way you approach a problem. And that's very valuable in humanities and social sciences. Humanities and social science students have a hard time sometimes learning that sort of rigorous, analytical approach. That's the goal for everybody to learn that, but it's hard. It's a little harder for them, I think, sometimes. You start with it, and that's a huge advantage. I think that's an asset. I honestly do that you now have 2 things. Probably more like 10 things, but you have depth in engineering and you have depth in social science. That's great. That means that you're extra. If I were hiring, for example, I would consider that a big plus. And I think people who have really dealt with complicated problems would agree. So I say, you should be.
Okay, hi, my name is Kiri. I'm a PhD student at STP. It's really great to hear your talk. So I'm just going to ask you a really direct question. I'm interested in the role of higher education in science and technology for international development. So if we were to establish a hypothetical situation in which we were to establish a university dedicated to science and technology in a developing country, it's really difficult to catch everything. It's really difficult to achieve everything from the start. So would you say, so it's kind of related to Yuzhang's question of it's really great for students to have growth.
Yeah.
It's kind of related to Chihan's question on the role of the government in doing this. But would you say if we were to have students that would be entering university with a blank slate, then would you, if you were to become the chancellor or the president of the school, etc., would you say that training in science and education, like STEM, should and would be coming first, would be a priority, like in terms of like the curriculum or the design of the school, or would you say that humanities and social sciences should be emphasized just as much from the get-go?
I wouldn't put anything first.
Yeah. So both.
I really would. MIT just started a new. It's not a branch of MIT, but it's sort of a collaboration with Singapore. This new university in Singapore called SUTD, Singapore University of Technology and Design. And the idea there is that it's supposed to be modeled on MIT, And the emphasis is on technology and engineering and design within that. And then they have this, they're engineers, right? So they have a graphic image of this, and they all kind of end up over here. But humanities is in there, and it's unclear to me why it's in there, because it's such an afterthought. You know, I think they want students to know, to have a little bit of breadth, but not too much, because then they'll be, distracted from their primary business, which is engineering. And I think it's silly. I think there's a lot of fear among scientists and engineers that students will become contaminated by literature or by history. I don't really think it makes any sense.
Were you involved in the project?
Only at the very last minute, and then I was just unhappy. So I wasn't helpful, if that's what I tried to be, but it was very difficult, because it was done already. This is how the great challenges often are. This is how they go in universities at a high level. Correct me if I'm wrong. The grand challenges are defined by engineers usually. And they're good projects. I mean, they're like smart. How are we going to alleviate the problem? And at MIT, that problem is being taken on by the economists, so that's a little bit different. Let's look at water cleanliness and distribution and that kind of thing. To me, that's a lot of it is a big social problem of distribution, for example, and the way governments operate in developing countries. For them, it's a strictly technical problem of desalinization, first and foremost, and then a couple of other water projects that happen to coincide with the specialties of the originators of the project. And then there's the social science piece. They haven't gotten to it all yet. And they will get to it, and then it will be sort of tacked on at the end as, okay, now can you help us sell this to the governments in these countries? Or something like that. It'll be an afterthought. And my point is that we're talking about ways of thinking. That's what I'm talking about, sorry. I'm talking about styles of thought and analytical approaches that you learn through study. Not just that are out there in the air that are of no consequence, but actual analytical styles. And you get a certain kind from engineering, and you get a somewhat similar kind from science, and you get a different kind from humanities, and you get a different kind from social science. And they're different, and they all work together. So that if you have this hypothetical university, have them do, pick 3 things and have them do them in equal measure. Students will decide what they care about. They'll decide what's most important to them, and they will go into it full bore. But they'll have these other tools available to them. It's not like students are thinking to themselves at every moment, which tool do I need for this job? Which tool do I need for that job? It's just in your head, and you know how to turn what you have towards a problem. If you're faced with a problem, you don't think it carefully, and you don't think it through to death. You just do it. And, you want the voices in your head to be multiple. Sorry.
So there were 2 things not in your talk that I was expecting. I'd be curious to hear you say something. One, I'm going to introduce as a comment. I know you're familiar with it, which is, there's this famous talk by C.P. Snow, Two Cultures. And I think the talk, given sort of radical religion, was partly reflecting a preoccupation with specialization.
Yeah.
That as society specializes, he identified this sort of fundamental divide in cultures between science and humanities. And I think some of this preoccupation is what you're addressing.
I guess, in a way.
And I wonder, for me to answer one question about STEM and STS, I always understood science and technology studies, people who practice this in different fields, as having a kind of fundamental belief that the division is maybe false, to say it strongly, and that science and engineering is a fundamentally human practice, and so we can understand science and engineering through humanities, and conversely, to be a member in a modern society, even doing humanities, you must be conversant with math and science and understand things. So my understanding is that is in the background of a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah. Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Can I comment on that? try to finish the second question. So I think we went too far with C.P. Snow. I think C.P. Snow had a really good point, which was he was trying to identify a trend in American discourse and to say we are developing groups of people who don't communicate. They don't talk to each other. The culture of science and the culture of everything else. And that's a problem. And that's not good. So one of the reactions to that, I think, was to make everything inter and multi, so that people were becoming these hybrid, not even hybrid. It's like a devaluation of the scientific approach and a devaluation of the humanistic approach. When in fact, I think they are real and they're important. And to act like they're not really crucial is a mistake. So I don't want to see the two cultures, so-called, get eliminated. I think that the characterization of them might have been of a moment in time. That our history right now suggests that we need to recognize that both, or it's not just two, there are loads of different, but they all have their particular shape and coloration, and they're hugely important to continue and to teach people to have both all. But that's good.
Second issue is much shorter. MOOCs.
Oh.
I was expecting.
Really?
Well, maybe because a couple of things you said, there's education initiatives, and that is currently in the news a lot in the United States. Also, MIT has a famous position in it, and given that the humanities offers critical thinking, all these skills into value testing, I would imagine it would be particularly resistant to MOOCs because of
It's very hard to teach humanities in MOOC format. It's really hard. Because the way you show what you know in humanities is by writing. And we have not figured out machine evaluation, machine assessment. And I think it's a huge problem. If that's what you're thinking.
Sorry, what are MOOCs?
Massively open online courses. They're trying to get 30,000 students to sign up. And it's pretty easy. It's expensive to develop such courses because MOOCs, unlike online education of your MOOCs involve interaction all the way through the class, and that is expensive, as you probably can attest. Having constant response to whatever the student's doing online. You can take MOOCs right now. You can sign up for them tomorrow. They're free, and some of them are quite good, but they're not meant to replace. I don't see how they can replace interactive education methods.
Dave?
Hi, my name is Dave, and I'm a master's student at STP.
Yeah.
My question is kind of a practical question. I mean, MIT is a private institute, so it doesn't have to answer to a bureaucrat or government officials on how you do your education.
Sure.
But KAIST is a government-sponsored science and technology-oriented university, which is supposed to pump out scientists and engineers. And when we do humanities or social science education here, politicians or other government officials always ask why do we need that for science and technology oriented schools? And I don't think it's a particular problem for only KAIST, but a lot of the universities that are supposed to be science and technology oriented schools operate with government funding. So how would you suggest that people communicate to the bureaucrats or government officials on
That's a good question.
those stuff?
Let me just clarify. MIT is a private university mostly. It's had a little bit of public, but it has relied on federal funding overwhelmingly since the government started giving money. So it's really dependent on national approval. And it's also, because it's an engineering school, the national engineering organizations are very, they tell the engineers what they can and cannot do. So, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on MIT to do things a certain way and not another way. So it's not quite the same as getting approval from a government bureau every year, every 5 years, which looks and sees if they approve, but it's not enough. I think we've all got to learn how to take this on in a more aggressive way. I think that as humanists and scholars of social science, and the arts for that matter too, we've been a little bit lazy and a little bit shy in really fighting for what we think is a proper educational design. But we haven't been good at all in explaining what that is, and explaining why a student of science might benefit from this. We are not laying it out. We're not laying it out well. And that's exacerbated by the fact that over the last 30 years or so, a lot of the fields in humanities especially, but also social science, have stopped talking to the public. They've stopped explaining what they do. They've stopped being part of the public discourse. So they talk to each other. They get more and more arcane and obscure and easy to make fun of. Easy to make fun of. And that's our own fault. That was stupid of us to do. And I think we have to better change fast because we're not making the case for the importance of what these fields contribute to the national interest. And we've got to tell stories that are true stories that are historically based about what happens if you continue to ignore these things.
Let me add one word regarding your question. So, for example, in European Union, they started actually inviting the social scientists and policymakers and lawyers into the review board of all the science technology product 3 years ago. So every time this person like me send a proposal to the European Union to get grants, it has to be reviewed by social scientists and lawyers and other literary scholars. Why? Because this technology improvement, how much the social impact, what environmental impact in the future. So if we turn to be safe, then I can get it right.
Yeah, so every project has to have an assessment of socioeconomic impacts. And I've talked to scholars in Europe who basically say this means that departments, like a hospital starts a program, it has to have a socioeconomic impact, and this basically means like those fields.
So your role is very important in the future. So last few years, I also talked to the government officials. For example, IoT is one of the key, the Internet of Things, key, market type in Korea. So, but it will be embedded into every single one of our daily lives. Yeah. So what does that mean? Yeah. So technology improvement is good. As always, not necessarily. Privacy and security, many things.
I would go a little further than that, honestly. I would say that coming up with the instrumentalist reason for doing things is a little bit easier than trying to explain why it's good for an engineering student to read Shakespeare. Now, I think most of us could explain why it is valuable and what you do learn from that, but it takes a little bit more patience and time. You know what I mean? To say that you have to say something about economic or environmental impact, that's almost a technical question. That's a turning sociology into a technical solution. And I think it's easier, but I think our goal should be much bigger than that, which is to get people to understand through examples what the analytical tools are that we're talking about in social science and humanities that in and of themselves help people think better. That's a little harder, but I think it's more important.
I think the discussion is getting more interesting and harder. The final question.
Thank you for a great talk. I'm Deborah, who is the background in social and public health, and I listened to your talk really interesting. My question is that, so you said that humanities is a way of thinking, help people to learn way of thinking, but my question is, should everyone know how to approach, understanding humanities? For example, there's Apple, and Steve Jobs needed to know, how to understand humans because his idea about iPhone and iPad, but all the employees in Apple should know anthropology or like history. So in elementary education system, I feel one of the most critical is that maybe only people who are doing policy work might need to get to that kind of knowledge. So how do you defend humanities for that kind of argument?
So a couple of things. One thing is that Apple, Xerox, all of those companies did bring in anthropologists, as a matter of fact. Xerox PARC is full of some of the most cutting-edge anthropology in the United States. And it's been like that for 20 years. So they actually recognized that there were ways of looking at the world that they were missing in product design in particular. I mean, they were instrumental, but it didn't mean they restricted what the anthropologists and the humanists were doing. Because I think the larger point is that you don't know what you're going to need. No student knows without a doubt what kinds of thinking they're going to need in their job, in their career, in their whatever it is they end up doing. Because for one thing, nobody ends up doing, I hate to say this, but nobody ends up doing what they expect they're going to do when they're 18. I can guarantee you that. You will end up in some surprising place that you never dreamed. And, maybe knowing thermodynamics has not that much use to you. Knowing how to think about the relationship between things that you learn in thermo could be really useful to you. So you just don't, you can't anticipate the solution to the problems you're going to actually encounter. That's the whole point I'm trying to make. So don't foreclose so many ways of thinking before you even know what you're going to do.
So do you think that like arts major, for example, the design or arts major should be taking science and engineering class like 8 courses per humanities?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Artists use a lot of math.
All right. Thank you very much for your participation. And on the way you out, pick up your lunch, and a sandwich, and outside, I think, milk as well. And then also some leftover donuts. And then there are some brochures available about MIT and the school's information, and you are free to take. And finally, let's give our